Hi, readers. Welcome to our April AuthorConnect Chat. I'm Michelle, the Chief of Staff at BookPal, which is a bookseller that believes in the transformative power of books to change people's lives. And today I'm here with Laura Vanderkam to talk about her new business fable, The Juliet Schools of Possibilities. Laura is the author of several time management and productivity books, including Off the Clock, I Know How She Does It, What the Most Successful People Do Before Breakfast, and 168 Hours. Her work has appeared in publications including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, and Fortune. She's the co-host of the podcast, Best of Both Worlds, and she lives outside of Philadelphia with her husband and 4 children and runs a blog on lauravanderkam.com. So she's got her hands full. Today, we will introduce you to her new book, Juliet's School of Possibilities, and then we'll have a little chat. Feel free to submit any questions you have for Laura at any time during the webinar. And same as always, we'll be sending out the recording to everybody next week. All right, Laura, go ahead and get started.
All right, awesome. Well, I'm apparently slow on moving the slides. We have already time management problems here. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I'm so excited to be talking with everyone about time management and productivity in general, and specifically my newest book, which is called Juliet's School of Possibilities, a little story about the power of priorities. Priorities, of course, a very important thing for all of us. Nobody ever feels like we have enough time. But I do believe that however busy you are, you can build the life you want in the time that you've got. To do that, though, we really do need to rethink how we think about time and maybe change some perceptions and start approaching these questions with a little bit different mindset and some smart strategies as well. So first, just a little bit about me. I appreciate the introduction you just did. I write books about time management and productivity. Which inevitably then I get the question of how did you come to be a time management expert? It is not exactly the sort of job one grows up wanting to be, not quite like fireman that way, pilot. Nobody grows up saying they want to be a time management expert. And unfortunately, I did not become a time management expert because I was always on time to everything either. I really do try to be, but I was in fact once late to my own speech on time management. Which was a wonderful, ironic moment for all involved. But I came to this topic a few years ago when I realized something that is dumbfoundingly obvious in retrospect, but at the time seemed profound, which is that we all have the same amount of time. We all have 24 hours in a day and 168 hours in a week. And so when you find people who are doing amazing things professionally, as I'm sure many people on this call are doing, and then you talk to them and you find out that they also have really cool personal lives too. They are raising happy families, they are involved in their communities or doing some sort of crazy athletic endeavor on the weekend. It's not that these people have any more time than the rest of us. It may be that they are allocating their hours in interesting ways that the rest of us can learn from. And so I've spent the past 10 years or so studying the schedules of people who are doing a lot with their time, both professionally and personally, and not doing a lot just to do a lot because there's no real fun in that, but people who have really, truly fulfilling lives, who are building the lives they want in the time that they've got. And so my books have come out of that, a couple including 168 Hours, What the Most Successful People Do Before Breakfast, Off the Clock. I speak about this topic to all sorts of corporate audiences, conferences as well. If you get a chance to Google my TED Talk, it's about 12 minutes long, How to Gain Control of Your Free Time. So I'd appreciate you checking that out. But what I sort of see as my special angle on this is I'm generally taking a data-driven approach to time. Because it turns out people will tell you all sorts of things about where the time goes. We all have stories we tell ourselves about where the time goes. But are those stories true? Well, I don't know, but let's find out, right? Let's find out for sure. And it's the same thing if you're making a business decision, you want to work from good data. And so I always have people track their time because maybe, something you thought was a problem really isn't, or maybe something you've never even considered, taking far more time than you might have imagined. So we want to know where the time really goes. And what's really cool is when you find out where thousands of people's time really goes. So I have done that, done a couple of large-scale time diary studies covering thousands of days in the lives of busy people so we can see how they succeed at work and at home, maybe have time for themselves too. So anyway, lots and lots of data, swimming in data. And then I realized something, which is that people like stories. And I think about this all the time with my speeches. Nobody ever comes up to me and says, "Hey, that statistic on slide 4, life-changing." Right? Nobody can quote back the statistics to me, but people can always tell me the stories. People come back and say, "Oh yeah, that story you told about the lady with the broken water heater," and can repeat the story back to me pretty much verbatim, having heard it one time. And I find that fascinating, right? Why do our brains work like that? But there's pretty good evidence that our brains do, in fact, work like that. And as we think back for human history, most of the time we weren't writing things. We probably weren't too concerned with numbers beyond what we could see on our hands and feet, but we were telling each other stories around campfires. And so this is the way our brains process things. This is how we learn our lessons. So I'm realizing this. And then my publisher, or Portfolio, which is part of Penguin Random House, who I've worked with them on all my books now, reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're looking to commission a few business fables." And they had a long history with this, doing things like Spencer Johnson's book. He wrote Who Moved My Cheese. There's, many of the best-selling business books of all time are, in fact, stories. Think about The 1 Minute Manager, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, the Go-Giver series. So clearly people like to read stories and even like their business lessons in the form of stories. And so they asked if I was interested in writing one. And I said, sure, I'm always willing to give new stuff a try, especially knowing that people like stories. So how can I take my time management stuff and turn it into fiction? Well, I developed, over the years, I've written about a lot of different productivity techniques. So I had some, secret strategies that I thought I would try to write a novel when what I'd been mostly doing is writing nonfiction. And for the past several years, in fact, I've been participating in something called National Novel Writing Month. And I don't know if anyone on this call has ever heard of this. Some people call it NaNoWriMo, with the first letters of it. But the idea is that you write a 50,000-word novel in the course of the month of November. Now, November is 30 days, so writing a 50,000-word novel requires writing 1,667 words a day, or if you're taking weekends and holidays off, you got to write 2,500 words a day pretty much. And so, it's not going to be a good novel, but it will be a draft. And then you can go back and turn something into something better. And so this has always been my process for writing nonfiction too. I try to write relatively quickly to get stuff down, and then I go back and take a long time to edit and rewrite. And so I like the idea of a challenge. And so I wrote this book, Juliet's School of Possibilities, during the month of November 2017. I started at the beginning, I had an outline, worked through it, kept writing scenes, and finished by the end of the month, and then took some time to revise. And in fact, was able to even pull some characters and settings out of previous NaNoWriMo projects I had done. So when, I'd been really working on this for a long time, you could say, or you could say I wrote it in 4 weeks, one or the other. But anyway, the result was Juliet's School of Possibilities, a little story about the power of priorities. So the heroine of Juliet's School of Possibilities is a woman named Riley Jenkins. She is an ambitious young consultant whose life is falling apart on all sorts of dimensions. She is constantly dropping the ball in her personal life, so her boyfriend and her friends completely losing patience. That might be understandable if her career was on fire, but unfortunately it isn't. She's been working hard and working smart, I guess, for a long time. She's just, we're kind of cheering for, I hope we are cheering for Riley, in the sense that she's found herself at this elite consulting firm where all her colleagues have gone to, the Harvards and Princetons of the world. And she went to Indiana University on scholarship. But she's gotten ahead by just being so smart and so hardworking. And she's, been able to run circles around to everyone for the first 4 or 5 years of her career. But then she is promoted into management. And suddenly she can't just do everything. She has to figure out, of these 3 things my team could be doing, which is the best one? And maybe the 3 choices, it's not obvious. Maybe it's 3 not great choices, but we have to make, the least worst option. Or maybe there's 5 awesome things, but we're understaffed, and so we can only do 2 of them. What are the right things to do? So she's having a really hard time choosing. And she tends to just go with whatever is blinking in front of her. Her particular bugaboo is that she is constantly in her inbox, the numbers rising like seconds on a stopwatch. And she clearly can't answer all of them, but she hasn't figured out how to focus on what she needs to. And so because of this, she's dropping the ball with clients, dropping the ball with her teams. Her company gives her an ultimatum: 30 days or she's out. And my hope, of course, is that readers can see their own time management challenges reflected in her struggles. We might not all work for elite consulting firms, but we can all sympathize with this idea of having way too much to do and not enough time to do it. So in the midst of all this, Riley is supposed to go to a leadership retreat for the weekend at a place called Juliet School of Possibilities. And she's so busy, she thinks it sounds like a complete waste of time, but she's stuck with it now, so she's got to go. And she goes, and while she's there, she meets this woman named Juliet, who is the head of this sprawling business empire devoted to various things related to the domestic arts. So she has television shows, books, webinars, and this retreat center located on the Jersey Shore called Juliet School of Possibilities. And while there, Riley kind of falls under her spell. She wants to know how this woman can be so successful with her business, also have this thriving family, and yet talk of having all the time in the world. And so in the course of a momentous night, a storm on the beach, Juliet shows Riley different possibilities for her own future based on different choices she might make. It's a little bit like A Christmas Carol that way. Not that I'm Charles Dickens in any way, but the idea that we have different outcomes based on different stories. And Juliet shares with Riley that her life was not all perfection all the time. She herself had to figure this out. She comes from even more dire circumstances than Riley does. And, at one point was a really hard up single mom and, was so grateful to get this job running a hotel. And yet then while she's there, her ambitions are getting bigger and bigger. She wants to start her own business, but she's so busy running the hotel and trying to, do her best for this job because of course she's grateful to have it, that she's trying to figure out what to do. And then while she's, running this hotel, complaining, I have no time to start my own business. At some point, one of the housekeepers says to her, you've been spending a lot of time talking about how you have no time, and points out to her, what happened that week when our basement flooded? You spent hours devoted to dealing with this immediate problem because it was there. And yet if the basement hadn't flooded, you probably would have said you were busy that week too. But when something urgent happened, you chucked other things to deal with the flooded basement. But here's the thing, you could have chucked those things even without with the flooded basement. I mean, we can choose what is our priorities and choose to get to those things first. And so Juliet forms this statement that she starts repeating to herself over and over again. Expectations are infinite. Time is finite. You are always choosing. Choose well. And you can see on the slide, that's a bracelet that says choose well. Juliet has a bracelet that says choose well. I have a bracelet that says choose well I bought for myself because I think it's a good phrase to keep in mind. What I mean by expectations are infinite is that there's absolutely no limit to the amount of things that other people might expect you to do, that society might expect you to do, that you might want for yourself. But we only have 24 hours in a day. Time is finite, right? So because of that, all of time is a choice. It may not always seem like that. Sometimes it feels like we are doing things under duress, but it's always a choice because the choice to do one thing is a choice not to do something else. And in some way, that might sound a little depressing, like I'm always disappointing someone, right? But I choose to use the word liberating instead of depressing, because once you realize that you're always disappointing someone, you go from saying, oh dear, to, oh well, right? If we're always disappointing someone, we want to make sure that we are disappointing the right people and not disappointing the right people, and sometimes doing one thing and not the other. So choose well. And Riley, hopefully, in the course of her weekend, learns to choose well. There's a fair amount of action, a few cliffhangers. Somebody actually said to me, don't tell me what happens next. I've got to see what happens in this next chapter, which of course is hilarious when you think about the fact that this is a business book. There aren't really a whole lot of cliffhangers usually in business books, but I'm excited to see that there are in this. So, in the back of the book, in the back of Juliet's School of Possibilities, I have a couple of exercises that people can do to take the lessons that Riley learns in the course of her weekend at Juliet's School of Possibilities and put them into practice in their own life. On the top of this slide, you can see a time log. I always want people to track their time. As we mentioned before, I love the data, but I think the data can be personally useful for you. If you track your time, see where it went, you can start to make better choices. You can start to say, well, what do I like? What do I not like? How can I change those things? I've actually been tracking my time on spreadsheets like this for 4 years. Nobody else needs to do that. I'm a little bit crazy in the time management department, but tracking for a week would be awesome. you can really get a good picture of your life if you track for a week. So I have a time log in the back, or you can download one from my website. There's also a lot of discussion questions in the back. So in case you're reading Juliet's School of Possibilities as a group in your, in your organization, or maybe in a professional networking group that you want to read this together, questions you can ask each other. Sort of, if we were to spend 1 more hour per week on a top priority professional project, what would that be? If we were to spend 1 more hour a week on a personal project, what would that be? Not that we need a 170-hour week. I think 168 hours is good enough. But asking these questions allows us to identify those things that are important to us that we don't seem to be getting to. And we all have those things that we know we should be doing, and yet we also know we are not doing. And I think it's important to have stories sometimes that nudge us to ask why. Why am I not doing this? What could I be doing differently? How can people in this group hold me accountable? And I do some visioning exercises as well that can help people see themselves in the future, and what would the vision of themselves happy and fulfilled in the future look like, and what are some time choices we can make in the next day, in the next week, in the next month or so, to bring us closer to this larger vision. Similarly to how Riley, in the course of Juliet's School of Possibilities, has a larger vision of what her life could look like if she makes wise choices with her time. So that's most of the material I wanted to present about the book. I'd love to connect with people to, if you'd like to learn more about me or Juliet's School of Possibilities or any of my other books, feel free to come to my website. I blog 4 days a week usually. You can also connect with me on Twitter and Instagram at Laura Vanderkam. I always love to connect with people there as well. And then we're able to open this up for questions and answers now. So hopefully people have been typing some in. Not sure I can see them, but hopefully you guys over from BookPal can, oops, sorry. Sorry, I was trying to get a little too clever there. All right, so happy to take questions.
No worries. I can go ahead and jump in. We actually have a question from Kimberly. She said, "Hi, Laura. I'm a big fan and delighted to be here at this webinar. My question is, how would you say this book is different from your other books?"
Yeah, well, the most obvious way is that it is fiction. It is a novel. So you can read it as such. I promise it has real characters with a little dimension to them, and cliffhangers at the end of every chapter, so that you might actually want to read it as something that you would put into your fiction pile. But the lessons I'm teaching are very similar to the ones that are in my other books, just in a very different format. And so if you like to get your time management lessons in the form of a story, then Juliet's School of Possibilities would do that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that is an interesting challenge that you took on to try a different style of writing. And I think that with the fable, you're able to connect to a larger audience sometimes for people that are maybe hesitant to pick up a business book and start reading. I know of a few. So I actually wanted to ask you if the characters Riley and Juliet were inspired by people that you know in real life.
Well, that's a good question. I am not either of them. I think, fortunately, in the case of Riley, and I might aspire to be Juliet at some point, but I have not yet achieved to that level. But I've done many interviews over the years with tons of inspiring people. And, Juliet is sort of an amalgamation of lots of those different people. But I do remember that one of the phrases Juliet says a lot is, "I have all the time in the world." And that came out of a specific interview I did many years ago. I was first writing about productivity, and I'd managed to get on the calendar of this, woman who did incredible numbers of things. And I was very excited about this, to learn her secrets of astonishing productivity. And I start the conversation with my usual assurance, like, "I won't take much of your time." And she pretty much just laughed. She said, "Laura, I have all the time in the world." And it wasn't technically true, of course. Nobody has all the time in the world. But what she meant is that she had chosen to speak with me. And because of that, she was going to give herself the gift of fully focusing on this conversation. She was perfectly capable of saying no if she didn't want to speak to me. But because she did want to speak to me, she had carved out the time to do it. She had taken care of anything else that might happen during that time. She had a support system to deal with any emergencies during that time, and she was going to be able to focus on the conversation and enjoy it. And I found that very powerful because I think that a lot of us have this assumption that incredibly important people are by definition very, very busy. And there's some logical element to this, right? Because of course, what makes people important is that there is a lot of demand for their time, right? That's sort of the definition of being important, is that there is a huge demand for your time. But it doesn't always necessarily follow that important people then cram every minute and double book themselves for things and are running around like a chicken with their head cut off. Many actually use the power that they have over their schedules to put in open space, to make sure that what they're taking on in any given day is incredibly well chosen, but also limited. And so that way, when things come up, when things go wrong, when there are emergencies, when someone really needs them, when they can tell that there's a good opportunity at hand, they have the flexibility to seize it. And I think the mistake many of us make is that we don't do that. We are not quite as judicious with what we elect to take on. And because of that, we feel a little bit more frantic and we feel like we have less time. So, if you want to feel like you have all the time in the world, you need to recognize that time is precious. And so you should be judicious about what you take on. But by leaving enough open space, because you have been judicious, you can also feel like time is incredibly plentiful. Feel like you have all the time in the world.
Yeah, I love the parable that you wrote, expectations are infinite, time is finite, you are always choosing, choose well, because it kind of reiterates the fact that you are in control of your time. So much in the world we live in today with technology and being able to work 24/7, we let that drive us and guide us rather than stepping back and being present and realizing that it's our lives, it's our choice, it's our decisions. And that's such a powerful message for anyone who's doing anything, whether it's a professional or personal passion that you're working on. So I actually, a lot of us in the office are more Rileys than Juliets. So our question for you was, what's your advice to people or your clients who struggle with the never-ending email box? Do you believe in the practice of inbox zero?
Well, that's an easy answer. No, I don't believe in inbox zero. And the reason is because it's pretty much impossible. I've had people who I've looked at their time logs who have tried to get themselves down to inbox zero. There was a hilarious one from a lady who tracked her time for me a couple years ago, that the week she tracked, she was embarking on the project of getting down to inbox zero. And so she would mark on her time log where she was. It would say IBZ and then the number in her inbox, right? So we were like at IBZ 375, and then like an hour later we were at IBZ 350, and then an hour later we were at IBZ, let's say 320, and then she stepped away to do something else, because of course you can't devote your entire life to email, and it would be back up to IBZ 400, because people email you, you're emailing in order to get rid of these emails, right? You're responding to emails that are in your inbox, and guess what happens when you send an email? Somebody responds, and so then you're back up from IBZ 0. You're back up to wherever you were before. And certainly, Riley experiences this as she's trying to clean everything out in her inbox. She's getting down, and then it starts going up again, and she walks away for an hour, and it's way back up, and it's impossible to ever truly be on top of it. And that's what I was saying. Expectations are infinite. However, I think it does help to realize that email is a tool to do our jobs. It is not the job itself, all right? And so the only way to spend less time on email, we also have to recognize email will expand to fill all available space. So the only way to spend less time on email is to choose to give it less time. And I think we need to decide, this is the amount of time I'm willing to spend on email and no more. And that will force certain decisions. It will force you to either not respond to something or put it on a to-do list for the future to get back to it. It will lengthen the time between when you respond to things, and that's actually a good thing, because the more open space you have in your schedule, the better. There's a certain, it's almost a sad paradox of this, but the reason people are often emailing you is they think you have good ideas. But if you are constantly answering emails, you will never have the space to come up with the good ideas that make people want to email you in the first place. And in fact, this is Riley's problem. She couldn't come up with good ideas for her clients because she was so spread thin because of all the time she's devoting to answering everything. And then when she finally pulls herself away from the inbox for, truly not thinking about it for a while, she maybe, you'll find out, has a career-saving idea. So yeah, I try to not do email first is sort of my mantra. And if you're going to take nothing else from this, you might want to have that as your mantra too. Don't do email first. If you've got a ton of stuff to do, and lots of things, some things that are going to require time and concentration, might be difficult, you have a choice. It feels so productive to go through your inbox first and delete everything and answer things, be like, yeah, I'm on top of it now, and now I'm going to tackle this other stuff. But the problem is all that email answering takes energy, and we only have so much. And so if you start the day with email, well, guess what? You're still going to have more email by the end of the day. Whereas if you start your day with the more focused work, the work that takes more mental energy, you'll make progress on that. And then you can still get to your email afterwards. Email is often very doable in short chunks of time. It's doable when you have low energy, whereas a lot of other work is not. So you need to be judicious about when you put email. And I tend to think it can fit around the outside of other things rather than taking our best time.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, I love a lot of the tidbits that you shared about email. Especially email is a tool to do our jobs. It's not the job ourselves. I think everybody needs that reminder once in a while. And, I was actually going to ask you why you think that people become so addictive to checking email and responding to email. And I think you touched on that, of that it makes you feel productive and like you're getting something done, but it actually distracts you from what is perhaps more important for you to be getting done, and where you should be more properly directing your energy. So that's a good reminder, I think, for everybody. And I actually was going to say, a big thing that our president pushes us to do here is to be on the phone more. And because with phone, communication can be streamlined so much more smoothly. And especially with half of our workforce being millennials, at first it's like, what? I have to call them?
Supposed to call people? Yes. That's scary. Like I can pick up the phone and call a number.
How do you do that again? No.
Yes.
So, and people are surprised, like, wait, people aren't going to answer the phone. People aren't going to want to talk to me. And the reality is that's just not the case. It's actually much more quality in communication, and it really can cut down a lot of the back and forth. And, what I say is, the more emails you send, the more emails you're going to get.
Yep.
So we actually have another question from Cassie. How do you recommend implementing "you have all the time in the world" when you have a lot of things outside of your control planning that pop up to encroach on that kind of mindset?
Yeah, well, partly it is just a mindset, because I have found that rushing just makes me feel rushed. So even if you do have a lot of stuff to do, it doesn't help to go around, I have so much to do, I have so much to do, I have so much to do. That doesn't make you do better on any of it. So repeating the phrase, I have enough time, maybe it's not all the time in the world, but say, I have enough time for the things that are important to me. And the more you keep telling yourself that, the more you will look for evidence to support it. The one thing I can say for people who don't have a whole lot of control of their time, that they're very much, their work time is spoken for by other people, by their managers, maybe even have multiple managers, so you don't have a whole lot of control over that, or at least control that you see explicitly as you're choosing how to spend your time, is that doing other things first. So if you have personal priorities you do want to tackle, and things that are maybe for your long-term career development or your personal development, side projects, passion projects you have, do those first thing in the day. You may not control what time you leave work, but you probably control what time you show up. Right? So, you might say, well, I go to work at 9, let's say. I am going to spend the hour of 7 to 8 every morning working on something that is long-term important to me. Maybe if you have kids and you're spending, 7:30 to 8:30 getting them ready, it could be before that. It could be 6:30 to 7:30 that you work on it. And maybe it's not every day. Maybe it's like 3 days a week you do this. But as much as possible, using that first chunk of the day for the stuff that is important to you makes you feel like you've started the day with a victory. And I know it's hard to get up early. I'm not a particular morning person myself, but, one of the best ways to start getting up a little bit earlier is to go to bed a little bit earlier. And sometimes that's difficult, but I think a lot of us, if we do track our time and look at how we're spending the hours before we go to bed, it's often not on top priority projects. We may be like puttering around the house or scrolling around on social media or, hitting next in the Netflix queue. And if that's you, I'm not saying it is, but if it's you, you might want to, cut that off a little bit earlier, go to bed a little bit earlier, wake up a little bit earlier, and then you can turn unproductive evening hours into productive morning hours.
Yeah, I love that. I was going to say that, oh gosh, what was I going to say? I don't know. The thought completely slipped my mind. So anyways, while I think about what I was going to say, we have another question from Kimberly. This is a classic issue that comes up at my office. People fill my entire day and also double book me with meetings. It's so frustrating. How have you seen people limit meetings?
So it kind of depends. If you are in a managerial role, which is often why you do get double booked, is because you're on like 3 projects that you're sort of supervising. And so, they have a project meeting when they have a project meeting, and it might be the same time as another team who doesn't work with them. So they don't know that their meetings are at the same time. So that's often why that's happening. One of the best things you can do if you're in a managerial role is to encourage your teams not to have as many meetings. Like we sort of become addicted in corporate environments to the idea of the recurring meeting. Like, oh, it's Tuesday at 10, we should have another meeting. But why? Is it to check that everyone's still doing their jobs? And I think it's often that you wind up in a culture where there are so many meetings that the only way to get people to pay attention to your project is to schedule a meeting. But then that becomes this whole vicious cycle. So if you are in charge of multiple projects, really say, I'm trying to do fewer meetings. We're only going to do meetings during, say, you could put a limit on it. Say, we'll do meetings between the hours of 12 and 3, and you have to deal with that. See if you can make them shorter. The other thing is to remind people that being invited to a meeting is not about getting to sit at the cool kids table in the cafeteria, right? We still have this thing from like middle school of, oh, well, I should invite everyone so nobody feels left out because we want to be collegial, but that's kind of the wrong mindset. Because when somebody is not needed to be there for a meeting for every minute, it encourages multitasking. It also takes away from the other people who are there who do need to make the decision, because then they'll try to, involve the other person or ask them questions, which is tangential. So as much as possible, every meeting has to have a purpose. If nothing is changing in the world as a result of this meeting, if the only difference in the world is that everyone is now 90 minutes older, the meeting does not need to happen. Straightforward. Everyone who is in the meeting should be required for every minute they are there. If somebody can multitask, they should not be in the meeting. So fewer people. Agenda for every single minute of the meeting, and not just for what the leader is doing, but what everyone in the room is doing. Really think about how you structure the beginning and the end. What is the opening? What is the ending of this? At the end, ask for feedback of how you can do it better, keep it more on time and on target. And this is so much effort, though, to put into any given meeting, that if you require this sort of level of effort for all meetings, that by nature tends to make them less. You can also encourage people to say, just pick up the phone and call me. Stop by my office. Make sure that people know you do not need to schedule a formal meeting to talk to their colleagues. Because as much as people realize that they can just have a 10-minute phone conversation or a 5-minute chat in the hall instead of getting formally on someone's calendar, that will cut down on the number too.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that we do here is especially when you tend to schedule a meeting, your instinct is to plan it for even slots, like half an hour, 1 hour, but there's nothing really that can stop you from planning a meeting for 40 minutes or 35 minutes. Maybe that's actually more realistic for your meeting time, and it seems so unnatural to us, but it can actually cut down on wasted time spent in meetings to meet that time block.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember what I was going to say is that the other thing that I think we all have to remind ourselves is that it's okay to say no. I think that we live in this world of a lot of us really want to be helpful to everyone and collaborate and please everybody. And the reality is you just can't, kind of like you said, that infinite possibilities. And the really important thing to me is that it's better to say no than to say yes and not fully commit. And I think that's kind of what you have to remind yourself when you're in those situations of feeling like you're going to let somebody down.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. We have one last question. Hi, Laura. First off, thanks to you and Michelle for providing this webinar to us. Wanted to know if you had any tips on managing my time with kids. We have a 3-year-old and have another one due in June. Congratulations. And it will be a crazy summer for us. Just wanted some general advice on handling time in that situation from Chris.
Yeah, well, when you've got a newborn, life is different. But it's funny. I always felt shockingly productive after I had each of my children, but it's because my expectations were so low. I would be like, okay, I'm only going to get to three things beyond life maintenance today. What are those three things? But I'd think really hard about like, well, what should those three things be? And then I'd probably get to those three things because, in the course of 24 hours when you have a newborn, you wind up seeing a lot of those hours, it turns out. I do those three things. I'll be like, wow, this is awesome. And the next day I'll do three more things and, I'm feeling good. And so I encourage you to, this is good advice for anyone, but set low expectations and meet them. It feels so much better than if you set high expectations and don't do it. There's nothing gained by putting something on a to-do list and not doing it. Whereas if you have a very short list and you do all of them, you feel on top of the world. So that would be my suggestion for that.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for your time today. And as a reminder to everybody, we will be sending out the recording next week. You can visit our website. I think it's on the next slide.
Yes.
There we go.
Sorry.
At book-pal.com/Juliet School of Possibilities to purchase this book for your organization, or you can send me an email at michelle@book-pal.com to learn more. And you can also visit the URL for the 2019 AuthorConnect Chat lineup to see our future Author Connects. We have one coming with Rob Joels, the author of Why People Don't Believe You, next. And I just want to leave everybody with one final tip. Obviously, with an organization that believes in the transformative power of books, my tip is to choose to make reading a priority. And you actually mentioned that in your book, you thank people for making reading this book a priority. So thank you so much, Laura, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.